Now, it's The Law Show on CL 650. A comprehensive look at everything you need to know about the law.
It's a legal matter, baby. A legal matter from now on.
All right, and welcome to The Law Show. It's great that you're with us here on CL 650. Today we have in studio Rudy Kisher and Alex Stojkovic from MKS Law in downtown Vancouver. And it's a new year, a lot of stuff going on with immigration and citizenship. And we have so many things to get through. But first of all, how is it going with you guys in 2017 in your new office downtown?
It's been busy. We're enjoying the new space. We've doubled our space. We've taken on some new associates, and it's a good thing too because with the amount of changes coming on, we've been pretty busy.
Alex, how's 2017 starting out?
Yeah, no, very busy. All trying to keep up with all the changes.
And that's kind of the theme of the show here today is that there's one area of law that has the most changes, probably citizenship and immigration is always moving because you're dealing with government, right?
Yeah, it's government. It's also very, the Tax Act is also, dealing with government. But on our side, it's very political. There seems to be a lot, the conservative agenda is often very different from the liberal agenda. And then when the world situation changes, it also causes the immigration, areas to have to be adjusted. So.
And you have, from what I've learned hosting this show, is that changes to immigration don't have to go through the House of Commons. They can just, what do they write? They just write in an adjustment, or what is it called when a minister makes a change?
Well, we have a number of different mechanisms. So the enabling legislation, the statute that runs most of immigration law, the Immigration and Refugee Protection Act, IRPA as we refer to it, enables the minister, delegates to the minister directly the power to make regulations in most areas. So most of our changes are either impacted through regulation, which does have a stakeholder element to it and does have some notice provisions. Regulatory changes need to go through Gazette and it's the Canada Gazette, et cetera, and they have to have a public criticism period, et cetera, a public comment period, I should say, not criticism. So a lot of the changes happen that way. In addition to that, many of our changes go through policy, which are just decisions made directly by the department, either through an operations bulletin or through a announcement of a policy change. So a lot of what we're talking about today, with the exception of the Citizenship Act, which is brand new legislation, are effectively changes in either regulation or policy.
And you don't often get much notice, right?
No, we had this thing also called Minister's Instructions.
That's what I was getting at, Minister's Instructions, yeah.
Which really, as Alex was talking about, there is no notice given and there is no stakeholder input. It's just basically comes out and we hear about it on the web like everybody else does and says, guess what, this is who we're picking today and this is who we're choosing and this is going to be a new requirement under the application process.
In fairness to this government, though, most of the things that we're talking about today are actual changes that they said in their policy platform they were looking at as far back as September of 2015. So it may have been a surprise that they're doing it this month, and they did a ton of things right before Christmas, which is always fun, yes. But they were items that they hinted that they would be addressing already back in their election platform.
Now the reason I ask this is because that comes from the minister in charge, and we have had a change at the top. So tell us about the new minister that you basically, that gives you these new directions and the changes in legislation.
Ahmed Hussein is the new minister, just recently sworn in. He is it's an interesting story. He's a former Somali refugee claimant, came here when he was 16, and then worked in Ontario with the Liberal Party, very involved with their community activists, and then went to law school, graduated somewhere around 2012, was practicing, very involved in the Toronto community, representing the Somali community there, and then is now the new minister. I mean, it's really a great Canadian story. I don't think you can see that in too many parts of the world where a Somali refugee is now, a minister, not only just a minister of immigration. It's pretty incredible.
Was he working in your field? Was he in citizen?
No, he wasn't. No. Not in terms of professionally. In terms of advocacy work in the Somali community, my understanding is he did quite a bit of refugee advocacy work, but not directly.
Have you seen, has he shown his hand as to what direction
he's
going?
We've seen absolutely nothing, actually, from him.
No, my understanding is he has been invited to the Canadian Bar Association's National Conference in June, and because McCallum set the new precedent to He came to our conference last year when it was in Vancouver. This year it's in Toronto. So there is considerable hope from the CBA that he will be participating and will give us a chance to all meet him.
Now, John McCallum, the former minister, has moved on to
now the ambassador
to China. But conversations we've had in the past, when he did come to the Bar Association meetings, he was quite open and talked to you about what you were expecting and hoping from the government. And so, what has been his legacy?
I mean, he set a great tone. Number one, it was a big change from the Chris Alexander, the former Conservative ministers that we had, in the sense that he saw the Bar Association and immigration lawyers as partners, as stakeholders, and somebody whose opinion he valued, and he was quite well received, I'd say, at the conference here in Vancouver. And he's left a tremendous legacy, I would say. I mean, there's been a total. He took a total different approach in terms of he had his marching orders from Trudeau. We had what's publicly available is a letter that Trudeau gave the minister and saying, these are the points we want. And he took those, he took those head on. And the biggest one, as everybody knows, is the 25,000 refugees that were to be resettled Syrian refugees to come to Canada from overseas. It seemed like a tall order, but, he definitely took the department to task in terms of making sure it got accomplished efficiently. And people that couldn't get efficiently were dismissed, and so he made sure it got done.
The way I would sum it up is essentially he is someone who, in those 15 months, transitioned the department from 8 years of Conservative rule to a different type of department, okay? And when I say that, it's because over the course of the 8 years, almost 9 years, the Conservatives were in power, policy flowed a lot from the PMO's office. It wasn't really the responsibility anymore of the senior bureaucrats in the department. Their job became, Ottawa was not a place that was warm and friendly to bureaucrats. So a lot of the best and brightest in the department went overseas to visa posts and to other opportunities. It's only now in the last 15 months where you have a much more, shall I put it, activist, a minister who's, Jason Kenney was a very activist minister for the Conservatives as well. But here there was a minister who expected the department to create programs without input from the PMO's office. And when he was told, well, we can't do this, we don't have the resources. Well, if I get you the resources, I expect you to do it. That's the new tone that was set. And if you look at what that's attracted, and this is in the federal government generally. A lot of people have moved back from, now they see Ottawa again as a place where things can be done. A lot of bureaucrats have moved from overseas posts. A lot of these more senior bureaucrats have moved back into policy-making roles and implementation roles. And you can now see a change in culture where instead of, they used to call them in the Conservative days, the fellows in the shorts, the 20-somethings in the short pants running around telling everybody what to do. They're all gone. It's expected that bureaucrats now will lead. They'll be given a broad mandate. The government wants this, and this done. It's your job to get it done. And McCallum has created in 15 months a change. Now,
so why didn't they leave him on the job?
Well, that's a very good question. As Rudy pointed out, he's been appointed ambassador to China. And I think that's because of the nature of our changing relationship with China. Up until now, we've not had political appointments. There's a long-standing Canadian culture around, there's only 2 diplomatic appointments that are not professional appointments. There's the Canadian High Commissioner in London, who at the moment is Gordon Campbell, former premier of this province, former mayor of Vancouver. But
his term there is ending, I think. So.
Yes, and the ambassador in Washington. And those are the only 2 political appointments that we do. We don't do anything else. Well, for the first time ever, there's a high-ranking, high-profile political appointment being made in China. The signal that is giving to China is that, hey, we are considering you on equal footing with Britain and with the United States.
And I would probably say that China is more important than the UK in terms of trade and future. Well, and the future of the world, right?
And so there are people who have said this is McCallum's demotion. Hardly. He accomplished what he was.
It was a sunset thing for him. This is going off and
but he's not a young fellow.
He's only 65, really, right? It's not that old. He looks, dare I say, maybe a little bit more aged, but yeah.
But, this is like a final patronage sort of position, go and shake hands and
I'm
host
not
dinners.
convinced that that's actually 100% true, because
Right.
there's expectations of managing that relationship.
And with, as we see with Trump, that rocky relationship with North America, with the Americans coming in, might need some, he might have an important role to play there. There's a go-between, right?
Yeah, and as the door's shut for the United States, maybe Canada's more important, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying is that, yes, we've had this obviously long-standing history with the UK, and it's an important one, but the future is probably east, towards Asia. The Trans-Pacific Partnership's gone now, so are they going to try and resurrect that with the remaining members? I don't know. It's going to be interesting to...
Yeah. Without the United States, there doesn't seem to be a lot of impetus to go that way, right?
All right, so we're going to come back to those sorts of things and NAFTA and the changes in the U.S. in a moment. But let's get into one of the other elements here. The four-year rule implementation for workers' permits.
Yeah, so you want to tackle that, Rudy?
Sure. I mean, this was, I thought, and I think Alex will agree with me, this was a horrible rule brought in by the Conservative government that came into force. They started the time period counting in 2012, and the idea being that if you had a sort of a trade job, what they call a B level skill level occupation, or a C and D level occupation, so semi-skilled work, right? So example, a mechanic or somebody working in the agricultural industry, that there would be a limit on the amount of time that you could spend here on a work permit, and they put that limit to 4 years. So this, we had clients that, calling us, employers and employees calling us in a horrible circumstance. So this started in 2012, they started counting the 4 years. So 2016 it started coming into effect. And so we started getting calls, and it came up during the election. I remember Chris Alexander being asked this question and almost seeming surprised that it was happening, because employers are having to look at their employee and say, yeah, I know you're a great employee. You're great for our business. You're making us money. We want you here. You want to be here. But unfortunately, we haven't found a route for you to get permanent residence.
And that's when they call MKS.
Well, then
they say,
call
what
us.
Can you guys do to help?
And we say, we hope you got us in time. We're going to try and get you permanent residency. And if we can't get you permanent residency, you got a lot of problems. And
can you give me an anecdotal story about, is this a senior executive? Or?
No, it's not. It's not. So I'll give you several that are, and Rudy has several as well. Just to correct Rudy slightly, April 2011, this was implemented, and it took effect April 2015. So we had clients, for example, who were in the horse training business,
right,
and who had horse trainers from Mexico who would work here 10 months of the year on these work permits. And all of a sudden, even though the same shortage of workers exists in Canada that existed the year before, these workers could no longer continue on to work for them, and they had to figure out some way to replace them. We had another example with a business up in Prince Rupert that was doing fish cutting and various other, that was sort of integrated aquaculture company that was doing both fish farming and various other things. They had staff from Chile. Three of their guys hit the 4-year limit and had to go home. It took incredible machinations and an enormous amount of money and lobbying on the company's behalf for these workers to stay, because to attract, sometimes to attract skilled labor this was even in Prince Rupert. This was like 100 kilometers out of Prince Rupert, for them to actually retain the rest of their workforce.
These people would be hard.
Exactly.
There's a shortage. There's a reason that they're there in the first place for the most part, right?
These Chilean workers had actually trained local First Nations people to do this work with them, but,
there's only so much.
You can do.
So what is it now that the 4-year rule is?
So there is no limit. So we've gone back to the old process was there is no limit. So if you have a valid work permit and you can continue to get valid work permits, you're allowed to stay. I think the thought process behind putting this
repeat that you can do, or
depending on the category, yes, you can indefinitely keep repeating that. Especially if you get what's called a labor market impact assessment, where you can show there's a labor shortage, then you're allowed to stay. I mean, sometimes immigration will start raising its eyebrows after 5 years, saying, "Well, what's your plan here? This no longer seems to be temporary." But under the Act, there is no reason why it's limited. I think the thought process behind it coming in was we don't really have any control of how many work permits we issue. And if we have a large population that starts to stay here for a long time on work permits, they become de facto Canadian permanent residents without having residency. And then what do you do with these people? They don't have a right to vote. They don't have a right to stay here. They're in this sort of temporary status, and we don't want to be faced with what we would call in our industry a humanitarian compassion application, where they've been here for 10 years, but they don't qualify for immigration. Give it to them anyway, right? And I think the Conservatives didn't want that happening.
They didn't want what they're doing in the U.S. as a path to citizenship just because they've been here for so long, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. All right. I just want to take a quick break. We just referenced the United States. We have a new president in the White House. NAFTA is on the board, and we're going to find out what if anything's going to happen in the near term or long term. We'll continue that. We're speaking with Rudy Kisher and Alex Stojkovic from MKS Law in downtown Vancouver, all about citizenship and immigration next on CL 650.
There's more of the show still ahead. This is The Law Show on CL 650.